Hi, in this video we'll be getting started with using Dubler in FL Studio. So once you've downloaded and registered the Dubler app, you'll want to click Create New Profile to open up a blank profile. At this point you'll also want to make sure that the Dubler mic is properly connected, and if it is, the logo at the top of the app here will be lit up green. So before we can start making music, we'll also need to make sure that FL Studio is set up correctly. So in FL, you want to go to Options and make sure that Enable MIDI Remote Control is ticked. Then after this you can go to MIDI settings and you'll see the Dubler in the input section. Make sure it's set to generic controller in the controller type here and select enable. Now once this is done we can start adding some channels to control. So if I want to control a pitched instrument, I'll first want to make sure in Dubler that I'm in a key or a custom scale. When you open up a blank profile, the pitch wheel is by default in chromatic scale. Now this will often give you a lot of unwanted notes when singing a melody. So to make sure you're in a key or a custom scale, you can use our auto key detect feature, which will lock you to a key dynamically based on an example melody that you're singing, or you can set it manually via the key section of the control settings here, which I'm just going to do now and set it to a C major. Now that we're set up in Dubler, I can load in a channel with a plugin or a synth I want to control. I'm just going to load in Flex here, and then I can start singing or humming a melody to hear that back. Ba, 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 ba. If I want to control drums or samples in FL Studio, I'll first want to set up a few triggers in Dubler. So you can check out our other video for an in-depth guide on how to train triggers, but I'm just going to quickly add a few now for this video. So when using FL Studio, if you have individual drum sounds or samples on channels such as a snare on one channel, a hi-hat on another, I won't be able to control the whole kit using the triggers. So to do that, I'll need to load up a channel with something such as FPC or another sample bank such as Native Instruments Battery. So if I load up FPC here, I've got the pad and I can control that full pad using those different trigger sounds. Now this is just a preset that comes with FPC, but if you want to load in your own samples, you can go to presets here, go to empty, and then you'll have an empty pad that you can drag in any samples or drum hits that you want to use. You want to note that each pad will be assigned to a MIDI note, and each trigger in Dubler will also be assigned to a MIDI note, so you want to make sure that the trigger you want to use lines up with the appropriate pad. You can change which MIDI note each trigger is assigned to by the note drop down menu here. In the channel rack, you can lock a channel to receive information from a certain MIDI channel in Dubler. To do this, right-click on the selected channel, go to Receive Notes from, Dubler, and then you can select the channel that you'd like to take information from. So by default, the pitch side sends out information on MIDI channel 1, and the trigger side of Dubler sends out information on MIDI channel 10. So if this is a pitched instrument, I can select MIDI channel 1. Now, if you've selected a channel on the channel rack, it will receive information from all the channels. Locking the channel will allow you to play them at all times, whatever you have selected. But if I want to make sure I'm not receiving information from the triggers, for example, on a pitched instrument, I can also turn them off within Dubler by the sliders at the top. So we'll now look at how to map the control dials in FL Studio. So in Dubler, these 4 control dials at the top can each be mapped to any MIDI mappable parameter within FL Studio. And if you click on them in the control settings at the bottom, you'll see that each dial has a CC number allocated to it, which you can change by either the plus or the minus. So now in FL Studio, I'm going to select a parameter that I want to control. So I'm going to select the cutoff of this synth, or right click it and select link to controller. Now here in Dubler, I'm just going to select map next to the relevant vowel that I want to control. So I'm going to select an R vowel here. So now that should be mapped, and you'll hear as I move from an E to an R vowel that cutoff dial goes up. Yeah, yeah. You can also map to triggers, and to do this, simply right click again on the parameter that you want to control and make that train sound for the trigger into the mic. So that's how to get set up with FL Studio, but make sure to check out our other videos and setup guides to go more in depth with how you can use Dubler.